Hello everyone. I am the mysterious man who will tell you the real scary stories in the world. Today I will tell you the story of the Scarecrow on Blackthorne Moor. It was the kind of moor that seemed to drink the light, leaving the horizon a smudged, dark line against the sky, with only occasional glimmers of distant starlight breaking the gloom. Blackthorne Moor sprawled endlessly, with thick tangles of heather and hidden bogs, and paths that led nowhere. No one went to Blackthorne Moor willingly. Even the wild animals that roamed freely through the neighboring fields were never seen crossing into the moor's territory. Travelers stayed away, and the few locals who lived near the edges of the moor never dared enter, especially at night. There was something wrong with the place of presence that didn't feel natural. People whispered that the moor was cursed, haunted by spirits from a long-forgotten past. Eleanor Stokes didn't believe in ghosts or curses. She was a practical woman, a botanist by trade and an explorer by heart, who had come to Blackthorne on her own terms, wanting to study the unique flora of the moor. It was rumored that certain medicinal plants grew there, rare and valuable, and she intended to find them. She rented a small, isolated cottage on the moor's edge, filling it with notebooks, specimen jars, and maps. Eleanor was as prepared as any sensible person could be for a venture into Blackthorne Moor, or so she thought. Her first few days were uneventful. She mapped the perimeter of the moor, careful not to stray too far from her route. The moor was eerie, yes, but Eleanor found its vastness oddly captivating. She appreciated the wild beauty of it, the soft, silvery mists that rolled over the ground in the morning, the shifting colors of the heather, the ancient oaks that seemed to twist out of the earth at impossible angles. At times, she felt the eyes of the unseen, a faint prickling along her neck. But she chalked it up to nerves. There was no one out here but her. No one else would be foolish enough to venture so deep. Then, on the fifth day, she saw the Scarecrow. It was tall and spindly, with a head like a burlap sack stuffed with straw and painted with rough, leering features. Its mouth was a jagged line, and its eyes were dark, hollow pits that seemed to stare straight at her, even though she knew it couldn't see. The Scarecrow was dressed in a tattered, old-fashioned coat that fluttered in the wind, and it stood in the middle of a small, fence clearing surrounded by thorn bushes. It looked completely out of place, as if some farmer had tried and failed to claim the moor's desolate land for his crops. Eleanor found herself inexplicably drawn to it. Her curiosity piqued. She stepped closer, peering at the figure as it loomed over her. The Scarecrow was battered and weather-beaten, its straw arms outstretched as if it were trying to embrace the sky. She could see patches of mold spreading across its chest, and the dark, button-like eyes seemed to follow her movements. There was something wrong about it, something that made her feel watched. As she examined the Scarecrow, Eleanor noticed an inscription on the wooden post it was mounted upon. Faint and weathered by time, the words were barely legible. She could just make out the phrase, "Here stands the keeper of Blackthorne Moor. Trespassers, beware." "Keeper," she muttered under her breath, scoffing a little. As if a scarecrow could keep anyone away. A gust of wind whipped through the clearing, and the Scarecrow's tattered coat flapped wildly. For a brief moment, she thought she saw the head tilt toward her, just the slightest movement, but it was probably a trick of the light. Shaking off a sudden chill, Eleanor stepped back and turned toward her cottage. As she walked away, she had the strangest feeling that the Scarecrow was watching her retreat, a silent sentinel against the backdrop of the moor. The feeling of being watched lingered as Eleanor returned to her cottage, despite her best attempts to dismiss it. Her logical mind told her there was no reason to feel afraid. A scarecrow was just a scarecrow, after all, a bundle of straw and cloth nailed to a post. But that night, as she lay in bed, she couldn't shake the image of its hollow eyes staring into hers, and the words carved into the post. Here stands the keeper of Blackthorne Moor. Trespassers, beware. Sleep came in fitful snatches, and with it, strange dreams. She dreamt of the Scarecrow, its arms outstretched, its head lolling to one side. But in the dream, it wasn't rooted to the ground. It moved, one arm slowly raising, pointing in her direction, as though calling her back. She felt herself drawn to it, unable to resist, her feet dragging her across the moor. When she was close enough to touch it, the Scarecrow leaned forward, whispering her name with a voice like dry leaves. Eleanor woke with a start, drenched in cold sweat. The next day, she tried to push the dreams from her mind, but she found herself compelled to return to the Scarecrow's clearing. As she approached, a thick mist was settling over the moor, giving everything an unnatural, shadowed look. The Scarecrow loomed through the haze, taller than she remembered, with its face seeming sharper, almost human. A chill crept up her spine as she took a step closer, her heart hammering. To her surprise, there was something new at its feet. In the ground just in front of the Scarecrow was a small pile of stones. Carefully, she knelt to inspect them and found something even stranger: a weathered, rusted locket half buried in the soil. Curiosity got the better of her, and she pried it free, brushing off the dirt to examine it. The locket was delicate, clearly old, with an intricate design of swirling vines etched into its surface. When she opened it, she found a faded photograph inside of a young woman with dark, haunted eyes. She snapped it shut, unease prickling at her. Why would a locket be buried here? And who was the woman in the photograph? She glanced up at the Scarecrow, feeling as though its hollow eyes held a hidden knowledge, as if it knew something she didn't. In that moment, she could have sworn its head turned just slightly, the jagged mouth stretching into an unsettling grin. "Who are you?" she whispered, barely aware of the words escaping her. The wind answered, whistling through the thorn bush that surrounded the clearing, a low, keening sound that seemed to echo in the emptiness. But as she stood there, staring into the Scarecrow's shadowed face, she thought she heard something beneath the wind of faint voice, calling her name. Back at the cottage, Eleanor couldn't stop thinking about the Scarecrow and the locket. She had no one to share her fears with, and every shadow in her small cottage seemed to grow longer as night approached. But she knew she had to understand the mystery, So she spent the evening poring over local records and old documents she'd found in the cottage's forgotten corners, hoping for any information about Blackthorne Moor. Her search yielded little until she found a mention in an old local history book, describing a tragedy that had taken place on the moor almost a century ago. A young woman named Lillian Grayson had gone missing after venturing onto Blackthorne Moor, never to be seen again. She had been betrothed to a local farmer, a man named William, who searched the moor day and night for months after her disappearance. Eventually, he went mad with grief, and the townspeople whispered that he had taken up residence on the moor, building a crude shelter and refusing to leave. Eleanor's heart pounded as she read on, the words blurring before her eyes. The story said that William had built a scarecrow to guard the spot where Lillian had last been seen. He believed it would keep her spirit from wandering, holding her there until he could find her. But as the months turned 2 years, the townspeople started to notice strange things on the moor. Voices in the wind, the distant cries of a woman. Some claimed they had seen the Scarecrow move, that it had become a vessel for William's soul after he died in a storm, still searching for his lost love. Eleanor closed the book, her hands trembling. Could the Scarecrow be connected to William and Lillian? Was that why she felt so drawn to it? That night, she dreamt again. This time, she was standing in the clearing, the locket heavy in her hand. She looked up to see the Scarecrow, its face inches from hers, the twisted grin wide and menacing. "You shouldn't have come here," it rasped, its voice a dry, hollow whisper that sent shivers down her spine. "Leave while you can." She jolted awake, her pulse racing. She knew what she had to do. She would go back to the Scarecrow and return the locket, leaving it where she had found it. Perhaps it would lay the spiritor spirits to rest. The next morning, Eleanor returned to the moor. The fog was thicker than ever, curling around her like ghostly tendrils as she made her way toward the clearing. She gripped the locket tightly, her heart pounding as she neared the Scarecrow. She placed the locket at the Scarecrow's feet, whispering, "I'm sorry, Lillian. I hope you can find peace." But as she turned to leave, a powerful gust of wind swept through the clearing, and she froze. The air crackled with energy, and she felt something brush against her shoulder a touch, light as a feather, but undeniably real. She turned slowly, her breath caught in her throat. The Scarecrow was leaning toward her, its arms outstretched, its empty eyes burning with an unnatural light. She backed away, but the ground seemed to shift beneath her, pulling her closer to the figure. Then she heard it, clear as day a voice, mournful and filled with longing. "Lillian." The wind howled, and Eleanor's vision blurred. She saw flashes of a young woman running across the moor, of a man, broken and grieving, building the Scarecrow, his hands raw and bleeding as he hammered it into the ground. She stumbled back, gasping for breath, and the visions faded. But the Scarecrow's eyes were still on her, and in that moment, she knew it wouldn't let her leave. The curse of Blackthorne Moor was binding her as surely as it had bound William and Lillian. She had become part of its story, a new guardian for a place that could never be at peace. As the mist thickened and night descended, Eleanor felt herself drawn to the Scarecrow's embrace, her voice joining the wind's mournful wail, warning others who dared to trespass. Beware,